Hi, you're watching Vantage Point, and today I'm going to give you the vantage point of looking at the cybersecurity world on a global scale, but also looking at a few important topics that we're looking at lately. And you heard about what happened in America about data leakage, and also looking at a lot of people seem to think that cybercrime is only about hacking and stuff like that, but a lot of organizations, government included, whereby they're thinking about what if an employee or somebody from the inside, brings that data out, the most important data they've spent a lot to protect, but actually it's the human weakness that they're looking at. So all this we try to cram into 25 minutes and discuss with you, because we have Mr. Drew Williams, the CEO of Condition Zebra or ConZebra. Thank you so much for making time. You travel widely around the world. You keep coming back to Malaysia because you have a soft spot for Malaysia, I know.
Absolutely, yeah.
Not because
it's the traffic. I love the traffic.
Not because
here.
we're the hotspot for cyber threats, but you've been working with cybersecurity in Malaysia. You've been working with a few institutions. You're even close to the NSA in America. So I guess the most important debate lately on TV and in the media is about Edward Snowden and PRISM system in the US, where the NSA, National Security Agency, can just assess things, and we've got this perception from all over the world other than US is that, hey, they are at least protected by the American Constitution, but the government can just assess any data of anybody outside US, going into Google or Facebook or even my Instagram, for example, and they just have everything, my photos, my mail, my whatever it is. So how do you go about giving consultancy on cybersecurity, risk management, and everything else when this polemic and issues and this discussion doesn't help in giving the true picture of what risk management and cybersecurity is, for example? Because the most trendy and popular topic tends to, take away some of the focus on what we should be looking at, because these are the most sensational things that people will be talking about.
Well, I think you made the point when you said it's one of the more sensational things that people are talking about, because you take what's going on with the NSA, you take what's going on with Edward Snowden, and you have to compartmentalize that. That's an incident that's going on in the U.S. about a U.S. activity. Yes, it's an internationally targeted, it focuses outward, but it also focuses inward. And obviously in the U.S. there are a lot of people screaming about their Fourth Amendment U.S. constitutional rights, search and seizure. But the whole Snowden scene, I think, is just really good press attention right now, quite frankly, because the press in the U.S. anyway is in a slow season. But from an international perspective, I do think it raises awareness for nations to be concerned about, who are they doing business with, how are they engaging these people, and how are they protecting their own privacy. Obviously in our case, what happens in America, the Americans are protected by the U.S. Constitution, but in the case of foreign entities, they have to look after their own interests, and I think just as a consultancy, and especially because we are an international consultancy, one of the things that we do advise in nations, especially in APAC, is that you need to look at your infrastructure, you need to look at how you're communicating, what are your assets, who's got access to them, and who are your friends.
How do you look at it from the cybersecurity angle? Because if we look at social media, that includes big names like Facebook and stuff, more and more enterprises are going exactly on social media, because that's where the chatter is. That's where the consumers are. So if they're also going down that way and, access to data and fine, it's the US government, but if they can do it, so can others. For example, this is a good lesson learned from that perspective, to just not take it for granted. And whenever there's this terms of privacy policy that you have to read, you just click I accept because you want to get in and use it straight away, for example.
Well, I think it's again, it's a good opportunity for people, especially the private sector, the consumers, no matter where they are, to reevaluate what they're clicking on before they click. It's always a good idea to read things before you say I accept. But then again, remember that there's this whole idea that you make a decision to advertise who you are to a degree by using social networking. then you also have to accept the consequences of being exposed at a far greater level than perhaps you think you are. And if you can live with those consequences based on the information that you're sharing with that space, that medium, then you're probably in good shape. But if you're doing something that you think is a risk, it probably is. And it's the old caveat emptor concept, where buyer beware. If you're going to take an initiative of exposing your private personal information, just understand that you may or may not be in control of that information once it's out in the marketplace. And you have to accept that responsibility.
So the fear is there's no such thing as privacy in the very network and online world.
That's a great concept, which is long gone. Yeah, there's no privacy in the network world. Of course not. There's no privacy in the network world. If you want to stay private, do as my 82-year-old parents,
Stay off it.
Stay off all of that stuff. I mean, I just had to force my father to get on Facebook just so he could see his granddaughters once in a while. But no, seriously, you do have to take certain level of responsibility or accountability. If you're going to take on the digital age, then you take on all of the digital age. It's no different than getting in a car and jumping on a highway.
But back in the 90s, just like in 1865, when the UK Parliament looked at setting 9 kph for a horseless carriage, for example, the starting advent of automotive, so because they don't understand it. In the 90s, when you talk about all this, people were seeing it as just, this is not something for me to understand. But more and more in the digital age, the user interface is becoming simpler.
Yeah,
it's
like
true. Voice-aided technology and all that.
Yeah.
But the mechanism behind is not getting any simpler. My data is not actually stored here. It's stored in some cloud somewhere, and I don't even know who looks after that cloud, whether their system is up to standard or not.
Yeah.
So, in a more complex and networked world, what hope is there for a user, be it individual or institution or government, to look at all this?
Wow, you're right. First of all, the information, once it's out there, where it's being stored is obviously up to the storage people, if you will. But what can a user do with respect to ensuring some level of continuity or due diligence? Again, it's a matter of asking the right questions, knowing who you're doing business with. If you've got a web browser, for example, or if you've got a website, who's managing your site for you? Is it one of these nickel and dime shops in the back room where you pay $2 a month for service and they're going to go down on the first power surge? Yes. Or are you investing? The key here is you have to invest in infrastructure in order to get the result that you're looking for. Most people think they can just sling something out there and let the cheapest guy show up and provide that service, and that really gets people in a lot of trouble. We've seen that just recently here in Malaysia as well. So
I have to go for the first break, but once we are back, maybe we'll bring it a higher notch in terms of words like or terms like risk management, for example. Is it an after thing, after you have bought the whole slew system kind of thing, then only you want to think about it? Or isn't that integral to be part of the DNA of your very core business, to look at it, then decided to look at procurement or competing interests and whatever else that you need to look at? That we'll discuss after this short break, because that might just determine how you and me, not just in private sector, but also on the public sector, on how we are governed based on our exposure online and in the network world after this break. Hi, thank you for still watching Vantage Point. And recently, Israel has come up with a statement that they're going to be the first fully digital nation. And the security side, they're already talking to Cisco and ensuring that that's the best state-of-the-art modern security system ever for online and digital security. So with that, I'm going to go back to Drew. And if that's the path that most nations are going to, then we don't have a choice. Even if I want to stay off the grid, in order to access my text file, in order to access telemedicine, for example, e-education, online system of learning, whatever else, it will be online. And as China has accused America of hacking into their system, US has accused China of hacking into their system, whatever it is, public institutional records are not sacred and off the game. They are going to be a much highly sought after group of data that people want to look at, be it for government to government or private to government. So in this matter, we don't have a choice, actually, practically. So how do we assess security from that standpoint? Because we might have to elect better lawmakers to go into the lawmaking institutions. Because if they don't draft real clever policies, if they don't structure out the system,
right,
then we're going to have chaos.
Well, first of all, good luck in electing better politicians. We seem to be failing at that miserably in our own country. You know, we can't seem to find anybody who can get the job done. You're right. As a nation turns more to a computing infrastructure to support its growth or its prosperity, with it come whole families of risk. And it's just a matter of taking each one of those categories and focusing very carefully on, is this worth doing this for? And if it is, then all right, if it is worth doing that, then what steps can we take to mitigate or reduce the most likely chance of failure in the operation? But you're right, you know, it does have a lot to do with how the government allows the people to come in and play a role in defining what those guidelines will be. Pretty much most of the GRC policies, the governance, risk, and compliance policies in the world, came first from the private sector, and most of them came from the banking sector and the healthcare sector. And that was because they were protecting patient records and investor records. And then one thing led to another because of corruption, because of capitalism, because of transferring, you know, that metadata back and forth for the highest bidder. It became a national concern to protect the interests of these consumers who may not be able to protect themselves privately because other agencies are in control of this information.
That's why it worries me, even though that's a trend now to have the posts of CIOs to look specifically at these things. But not many companies embark on that road. It's still about, let's say if I'm in a business, so what kind of IT infrastructure do I need? Then I go out and procure. Then only I'm looking at the security side of things. Then I engage another person to advise me on that. But if we're looking at it, if we take the Edward Snowden case, and U.S. government is very particular about security and stuff like that, but it took just one guy to go out and bring a flash drive, for example, maybe, and that's all it's needed.
That's what we know. That's the devil we know.
Yes.
There's also a lot of devils we don't know.
So how can I trust my mobile company, for example, my number? No wonder people keep calling me at 1 o'clock in the morning, because any low-level executive can, just take a whole list of subscribers' number and just sell it off for profit. Because more and more, these group chunk of data, they are very, very expensive, getting higher and higher in terms of how much people are willing to pay. And if we look at what happened to Sony, example, the PlayStation Network, that was also people hacking to get into the lease.
It was.
So,
well, with respect to Sony, I mean, that's $1.7 billion in lost assets, and that's because they didn't do their homework. I mean, this was a known attack type. It was a 13-year-old attack type, very old style, and it was a case where Sony just didn't do their basic housekeeping. When you look at risk, you look at it in three categories. We do. The first level, of course, is the policy itself. You know, what are the operational guidelines for running our infrastructure? Second are the controls, and that's the devices, the things that you buy, the firewalls, the routers, all the cool gadgets that come out of the box and you wire it into something. And then the third are the levels of exposure that happen when you decide to tell the world you're in business. So when you've got a policy that looks at your guidelines, you've got your controls, which you need to be very careful about what you implement, how you implement, and whether or not it's compatible with the other things that you're implementing. And then you've got your exposure component, which is your web applications, your web-facing activities, the website itself. Those three areas are almost like layers in an onion. Those are the areas where I'm going to say boldly 100% of security problems happen. All of the security problems that at least I know that are documented.
Either one of the three or all three? Or
one of those three areas. And most of the time it has to do with a combination of those three that yield back to somebody didn't check their settings, they didn't update their system, they had the wrong patch, or they had an outdated. I'll give you an example. A well-known financial institution in Malaysia came to us a couple of weeks ago and said, holy cow, our website's down, we're in trouble. Can you fix it? We came in and helped them remove their malware, but their system had not been backed up properly in almost 5 years. And so when we restored their site wasn't restored the way it was originally designed because they were using 5-year-old non-patched technology, and they complained that it was our fault when in fact they didn't even have a maintenance plan in place, let alone an architecture plan from a backup perspective. And so while we did get them restored, they still complained that it wasn't effective. Well, it wasn't effective because they didn't A, have a policy, B, they didn't manage their controls, and C, their external exposure was compromised.
Cool. We have to go for the last break, but once we are back, I'd like to get into that. Most of the time, from your point of view maybe, it's a weakness in leadership because the IT guys say, we know that, but the senior management just refuse to see it the way we see it. And now we're pushing ICT to the SMEs, and they even have less of resource to go around and look at these things. So, what from your experience is the main cause of all this happening? Because it's not that they don't know. If you're a big company, of course you update every year and not wait for 5 years. But what contributed to that happening? And that vis-a-vis one person, I'm still amazed at that. One person can bring the mighty institution down on its knees. And would that in the future make sure that people like you and me working in the office somewhere have layers of security details to get through before we can even start to log in into our computer or something? Where does Drew see this going? That after this short break. Thank you for still watching Vantage Point. We're still talking about cybersecurity, cyber threats, and the trends for the future. And almost across all literatures that I've read on this, comes back to the point that most of the attack can and could have easily been prevented if people, units, institutions, companies, public sectors, whatever, has followed through what they were supposed to follow through in policy, in buying things, in maintaining things, for example. And in like you said, the third criteria is in what kind of level of exposure do you want to put out there for people to have access to. Yeah. So it's always the human factor, leadership factor. So from Consribra point of view, what is the main single dominating factor across all this? Is it the lack of trust in the system by senior leadership of people in power, or is it the executive taking a holiday on the job and not informing their senior leadership? Or what is it?
Man, if I looked across the board, I'm going to say with one word, it's insecurity. It's almost like antimatter. It's insecurity. Either leaders are a little threatened by the idea that a techno guy that's down the food chain somewhere can come up and say, hey, did you know that if you do this, well, I'm the leader, you shouldn't be able to tell me. Okay. So they're a little insecure in their own role. There's a lot of information that it's just not getting passed up the food chain. So it's compartmentalized. We have a big problem, especially in the IT space, where the CFO and his company, his group, they're looking after the profitability of the organization, where the CIO is looking at securing the assets of the organization. And they don't like to talk to each other because one requires spending money with a low ROI that you can see tangibly, and one requires investing money to see a high ROI to keep the shareholders happy. And so there's a split there that's quite
so it's a functional thing.
Well, that's part of it, but I think it also has to do with just the idea that there's a lack of confidence to say, if I don't put something here, if I don't put a box in front of me, then I don't know what's happening, because I need to see something tangible in order to see that something's occurring. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. But it has a lot to do with insecurity. I'm not sure who to call. I'm not sure what the problem really is because I'm hearing it from different people. Who do I believe? There's so many people out there with answers, that kind of thing.
Imagine during the days of just servers and PCs, now you've got tablets, smartphones, and whatever else. Yeah. So there's more things to know about, lesser people to think about them.
Yeah, well, that's the whole BYOD trend. The mobile computing. What do I do with these devices? How do I get access? And yeah, I mean, that's an area that ConZebra is really focusing a lot of our attention on, is the whole mobile computing area.
So is it better to ask the employees to bring their own devices and use it in the office environment, for example?
It can be. Yeah, it can be. I mean, we recommend, depending upon how big the client is, we'll recommend a whole procedure that they follow with respect to bring your own device, mobile computing. Things like partitioning data, encryption, authentication. There are a lot of things that you can do, but you hit it on the head. 90% of the problems, hacks, attacks, security issues, happen behind the firewall, which means they originate because of something that occurred internally, and that could have been prevented. And that's what gets, that's very shocking to people still. Well, it's not changed.
We could debate about this until the car comes home, but maybe preparing the next generation, the human capital that would be the CEOs, CFOs, CIOs of the future, CTOs, whatever O's they are. And if from university or school, they've been taught to look at this strategically, and you, I mean, managed to get millions to pump back to Utah, for example, into the public university, to look at, you know, how to reap. I read somewhere that it's going to be like hundreds of billions by 5-6 years time, the global IT security industry. So who's going to look at all this? It's not the next generation. And they would have to look at this since they are in the university right now, not after, for example.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I wrote a grant, a federal grant through the U.S. Department of Labor to support actually the NSA's new data center, which is in Utah, 6 kilometers straight down my road from where I live.
Okay, cool.
And it's a $3 million grant that went to a major university to start a postgraduate study program, but also a reorientation program for people who have left other technology fields. They've been displaced by international transfers or companies that have left. And these people are now getting basic training and to mid-level training on IT security and secure architecture, because, you know, organizations like the NSA and the state of Utah has a huge population of security companies, for example. It's one of the hotter spots in the U.S. But this is going to be something of a feeder for these people who are going through college, either for a two-year level or a 4-year level, or even a postgraduate level study in information security, infrastructure security, risk management. And you're right, you have to hit them early. I mean, we talk about secure coding now. In the old days, when you're talking about Java or C++, you weren't talking about secure coding. Now we're talking about how to secure code in HTML, how to secure code when you're just writing a basic script, to reduce that prevalent problem that we see with respect to code being, you know, spoofed or easily hacked.
And for a developing nation like Malaysia, maybe that's one niche area that we can look at for the future. Because I'm sure not many people have really looked at it strategically and planned human capital of future for that.
Is there one area?
Because the job will be there.
Well, the job's
we're
there.
not going to have reduced problems in this.
The jobs are definitely there. I mean, you know, they're everywhere. But I think the one thing that Malaysia has to do, my advice would be just listen. You know, focus on what's going on and see that these trends are actually hitting. Now they're hitting your companies in your country. They hit, you know, the registrar for .my just 2 weeks ago with an ages-old attack because their servers weren't updated. I mean, that's simple. It was an easy thing that could have been completely avoided and shared, you know, lost that embarrassment. So it's just pay attention.
You're going to be a role model for a lot of young Gen Y Malaysians out there. Go and Google Drew. He's tons of materials about him on the line. But of course, he guards his other information very, very jealously, I know. You will have to make him come back to Astro Awani to get more information, not just online. Thank you so much, Drew, for making time.
Pleasure.
Thanks to you for watching Vantage Point, and we'll see you in another episode very, very soon. Goodbye. Thank you.